Another major blow to Sri Lanka's economy as it defaults on its foreign debt. Many blame the president and demand he resign, but is Gotabaya Rajapaksa responsible for the crisis, and can it still be fixed? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Sri Lanka. Soaring inflation, debilitating power cuts, and massive food and fuel shortages. Sri Lanka is in the midst of its worst economic crisis in 70 years. Foreign currency is in short supply, and the government in Colombo simply doesn't have either the money to pay for essential imports or make its debt repayments. Last week, it announced it was defaulting on its foreign debt as it desperately tries to take control of the situation. But many inside the country have had enough of the government, and they want the president out.
The economic crisis is a very bad condition in Sri Lanka. So not only all the nations like Sinhalese, Muslim, Tamils, we all are fighting to send this government, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So we all are fighting. The people are staying from day and nights to protest and win against to get a proper decision.
Protests like this have plagued the country for weeks. As basic goods run out, so too has Sri Lankans' patience. But how did the country go from enjoying notable economic growth a few years back to reaching the brink of bankruptcy today? Well, the coronavirus pandemic massively hurt Sri Lanka's tourism industry, and the war in Ukraine hasn't helped the situation either. But poorly timed tax cuts by the Rajapaksa government also played their part. It's now up to Ali Sabri, the country's new finance minister, to try to turn things around.
So it's a Herculean task. I mean, we are not underestimating it. We know where we are, and the only thing is to fight back. They have no choice to give up. So that's how we are here.
A massive task, no doubt, and Ali Sabri knows he can't fix it alone. This week, the new finance minister is in Washington looking for a $4 billion bailout package from the International Monetary Fund. Now, should he succeed, it may help Sri Lanka in the short term. But many inside the country no longer trust the government to deliver in the long run. Each day, the pressure on President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is growing. And now the opposition is threatening to oust him in a vote of no confidence.
Yes, we are confident that we will get the numbers, and we will bring it when we believe the time is right, because it's our no confidence motion and it's our prerogative when we bring it. So we have assembled all the different political parties. We are getting the support from the dissidents from the Rajapaksa camp, and over the next 24-48 hours, we'll know exactly where we stand. Parliament convenes tomorrow. And we will do it at the right time.
So it's gotten so bad that it looks like the last good option for Sri Lanka is to default and start as orderly a process as possible toward restructuring its debt. But where does that leave Sri Lankans and their leadership? Let's discuss that now with our panel. All joining us from Colombo, A Wijewardena is Sri Lanka's former central bank deputy governor. Umesh Moramudali is an economist and lecturer at the University of Colombo. And Shihar Hassan is an attorney at law at the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. Thanks all so much for being with us. So like I said, if there is any good news here, A Wijewardena, has Sri Lanka at least then avoided a dangerous, disorderly default? So it can now kind of start to rebuild the economy with the IMF.
Well, Andrea, what has actually happened is that this particular default is not unexpected because the economic policy measures taken by the present administration from around, say, 2019 has contributed to the path to the default. Because all the macroeconomic fundamentals in Sri Lanka are imbalanced. We have a huge budget deficit because the government had lost the revenue base by offering a very attractive concession to income tax and value-added taxpayers on one side, and the increase in the government expense on the other side. And as a result, the the deficit in the budget has increased from 6% of GDP to 12% of GDP. So to fill the gap, the government had borrowed heavily from the banking sector. And during the last 26-month period, they had borrowed about 3.2 trillion Sri Lanka rupees, which was actually an increase of about, say, 118% of the total borrowing. As a result, the money stock has increased by 3.2 trillion, and it's a 40% increase. So when you have a massive monetary expansion like this, it actually leads to the depletion of the foreign reserves of the country, and also pressure for the exchange rate to depreciate.
Exactly.
So as a result, what has happened and is that we have lost all the reserves that are available for Sri Lanka to import the essential fuel, cooking gas, foods, and various other raw materials for industries. So as a result, after we had gone to the bottom of the reserve position, now presently, as at the middle of April, our reserves, foreign reserves were around, say, $200 million.
Okay.
So naturally, we cannot pay.
Absolutely. And now Sri Lanka is where it is. And Umesh, I mean, do you at least feel any sense of optimism at this point? Because here, we have Finance Minister Ali Sabri, who actually tried to resign a day after he was appointed. Yet it's now up to him to kind of be the savior of sorts in negotiations with the IMF in Washington. I mean, do you have any confidence now that at least there can be an orderly restructuring that he can help devise? And I mean, tell us what you think he's actually up against, especially considering he didn't really want to do this job.
Well, what he says is that he doesn't have any other option and he has to save the country, so he had to step in. So we would, I mean, as countrymen, sadly, we'll have to rely on that. One positive thing though is that the new central bank governor, who is a very well experienced central banker, who was a former senior deputy governor, he somehow has established the confidence of the market, particularly with recent actions immediately that he has taken after assuming the office. So there's hope there, and also the new Treasury Secretary. So one of the reasons why we had to come to this position, as Mr. Wijewardena explained, that reserves are depleted to a very low level, was the very careless actions taken by the former central bank governor. So it was essential to replace the position with someone that the market as well as IMF could trust. I think that appointment was quite good, but so we had to count on him a lot in this negotiation process, and only we could hope that the finance minister will do the needful and allow the officials to do the negotiation without unnecessary political intervention.
Okay, Shihar, let me come to you and just hear your feedback on the last two panelists and what you think of their analysis so far. And I mean, is it now up to Ali Sabri to be Sri Lanka's savior here in these negotiations? Because this debt restructuring is now everything, really, to saving Sri Lanka's economy, at least in the short term.
Yes, having known President's Counsel, Mr. Ali Sabri, for the past 12 years personally, in a personal capacity, I know that he is a ferocious negotiator, a man capable of delivering. With all due respect to his intellect and abilities, what I believe personally is that Sri Lanka, as a country that has declared on its own bankruptcy, IMF has very least to offer on a negotiation table when Sri Lanka has nothing to offer back. So the current situation in Sri Lanka is that to raise $8 billion, Sri Lanka is to lease out or sell valuable property within Colombo, as per the information received this morning, including the main international airport, the Bandaranaike International Airport of Sri Lanka, for $2 billion. So what I believe is that this trading between assets and dollars, trading our assets for dollars, is going to cost us even further than the trap that we are already in. So I do not know, as a country that has very less to offer on the table, whether Mr. Ali Sabri has anything to do at this juncture to negotiate and do something. In the meantime, the policies that are adopted in the long run we have been talking about the failed policies yet again and again and again, but the ruling class does not understand as to how to resolve this, because they continue with the same policies. Again, a new appointment of cabinet has taken place today. 17 members, very unpopular members of the parliament have been appointed to the cabinet once again. The senior ministers who held positions earlier have refused to take up positions because of the backlash of the public. So I honestly am thinking as to whether Mr. Ali Sabri's presence in Washington DC or at this juncture, I mean to meet the officials of IMF, would do any good whatsoever.
I mean, let me ask you this. First, I want to step back for just 1 second and ask that if in hindsight, it is clear now that the government should have at least better prioritized its people and their essential needs, not least medicine, food, and fuel, over debt repayments, because now it's obviously able to pay for neither of those things and people's lives are at stake. Is that at least understood, that there was a very bad choice made?
I honestly think the government is yet to understand anything relating to the people. So much so that the economists, the senior economists of this country, including the elite panelists from the central bank today, has been urging the government not to make the payment on 18 February, the $500 million that was paid, and to go to the IMF since the beginning of last year, because many senior economists have been saying that without going to IMF, we have no bailout. But until as far as March 2022, the government, the ministers were playing it low. They never took heed of any advice that was given. They were completely shutting off any suggestions. And the arrogance of the ministers was what brought the people to the streets. When the people were dying on fuel queues, the minister for petroleum, the latest appointed minister in the end of February for petroleum, was saying, I never saw a queue, whereas 9 people have died in fuel queues. Yeah. So I am lost for words as to the insensitivity and insensible decisions that are being made even at this juncture without proper consultation and without proper understanding of the situation.
Okay, A Wijewardena, are you on the same page there? I mean, is the government that out of touch, do you think, with what even needs to be done from here on out? Is it still going to misprioritize paying what it should put off in order to almost save lives in its own country?
Well, of course, Shihar has very correctly presented the position, Andrea, and I have to agree with him. In fact, I was one of the economists who had canvassed with the government not to pay the $500 billion US ISB that matured in January this year. And as a result, what happened was Sri Lanka doesn't have sufficient foreign exchange to import the essentials for the people, like medicine, fuel, cooking gas, and food items, milk food, and all these things are in short supply in Sri Lanka today. And we have long queues for people to buy them. And when they are in the long queues, actually, they are actually spending their time not in the workplace, but in the queues. So that's actually wasted resource. So because of this reason, the government has got the proper appreciation by the people. So that is why all the people, including the young generation, have now come to the street, and they are now agitating that the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration should step down.
Okay. I mean, Umesh, let me ask you about that. Do you think there really will be consequences for how poorly all of this was managed? Or can Rajapaksa, in a sense, survive? Because the government has pushed the point that they believe it's actually the impact of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and that, the pandemic. Those issues really are more to blame. And now he has restructured his cabinet in order to start better serving the people. He sent the finance minister to help restructure the debt. Do you think it will all work politically and economically for Rajapaksa at this point?
Let me clarify the first point about the Ukrainian war and coronavirus, whether that was the cause of this crisis. It clearly wasn't, because economists like Mr. Wijewardena and several other senior economists specifically mentioned that restructure rate go to IMF for 1.5 years or more. So they made a conscious choice not to. They made a choice to fix the exchange rate and did a series of adamant decisions. So that is what has led to this. Now it's not only an economic crisis. Now it's a political crisis, health crisis, fuel crisis, power crisis. We don't have electricity. Now, for example, today I had to figure out a place to do this interview because we don't have electricity at home. So people can't plan the tomorrow. We get our electricity cut scheduled today for tomorrow. So imagine how difficult it is for someone doing a job like IT, how to plan it. So it's entirely government's fault the mess that we are in today. And secondly, we are not going to get out of this mess if this government, if Rajapaksa in particular doesn't resign from their post. I've been to these protests few days. The protesters are very clear, people are very clear that the Rajapaksas need to go, and without them leaving the offices, resigning, or at least bringing in an amendment to reduce the president's executive powers, people are not willing to help to restore the economy. Because what we need to understand is you need people's confidence to run an economy. This government allowed to create a black market for foreign currencies. Now people are not willing to send the money through official channels. Their simple answer is until Rajapaksas go home, we are not sending money to the banks. It's that simple. It's very simple, that you can't establish the confidence without them leaving the office, and without that you can't fix the economy. Even if you go for an IMF program, or even if we get the debt restructuring done, that truth that Rajapaksa really needs to understand very clearly.
Okay, I mean, you have said before that there are a lot of things that really aren't understood about what's gone wrong with the economy. And I want to clear up another perhaps misunderstanding. Some even call it this mythology, saying that, oh, it's China's debt trap that has driven Sri Lanka to the depths of this crisis, when others are saying, no, that's not true at all, actually. A lot more is owed to Wall Street creditors than to China, who holds, correct me if I'm wrong, the statistic I got is about 10% of the debt. Yes, China does owe one of the major ports in Sri Lanka, but actually what China is owed is rather on the margins compared to the larger debt. You tell me what is actually true. Whom does Sri Lanka owe money to?
Actually, most of Sri Lanka's foreign debt are to the international creditor, what we call Euro bonds or international sovereign bonds. Those are to the international banks, so on and so forth. China's debt is, including the state-owned enterprise debt, is around 14 to 15%. If you add the what we call recently obtained loans called term loans, which are categorized as market borrowings, even if you include that, China's debt will only be 20%. So those are not the biggest problem, right? The biggest problem is that we have a balance of payment issue. We are a country with twin deficit. So going constantly relying on international capital markets through issuing euro bonds was not easy. And this government they are the ones who started doing this in 2007 and constantly doing that over the course of the years. And not only that, they've decided to get the international investors to invest in local government securities, which also created a lot of vulnerability in the economy. So during certain few years, particularly when Dr. Kumaraswamy was the governor, they had to fix these vulnerabilities, and that caused increasing the stock of sovereign bonds more. So it's not really a China problem. Yes, Chinese loans have certain problems, but you can't entirely put the blame to China. It's Sri Lanka's economic mismanagement that has led to this problem.
Right. I actually wanted to mention at the top, excuse me that we didn't. We did invite the government to we asked please to send us a representative to give us the government's point of view. That was very difficult to get. They couldn't provide anybody, because I would like to hear more of what the government thinks its defense is at this point, because it's very easy to hear a lot of people to say exactly, like as all of you have, what's gone wrong. And then difficult to get what the defense is. But we are where we are. So Shihar, let me ask you now how much worse you think this could actually get. What are the long-term prospects now for Sri Lankans themselves? Will they see prosperity again? Will they see another government in power?
Yes. First of all, let me address the very first issue, debt repayments. Now, Sri Lanka has defaulted or has planned to default at least for a temporary basis of $51 billion worth of debt that has to be repaid. But in the meantime, at this juncture, Sri Lanka, according to the finance minister himself, Sri Lanka's purchasable currency reserves is, I believe personally, is less than $700 million, whereas the rest of the money is in Chinese yuan. So at this juncture, it is a grim reality that we have to understand that the next month, the people of Sri Lanka can go hungry. People can die in famines. But in the meantime, whether there's any silver lining after all this, uh, probably if the country, if the political elite decides to do something about this. But even today, what I see is all this blame games about what happened in COVID situations and what happens in Ukraine, and blaming the earlier government of Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe. This is all what's going on. Unless if we restructure our economic situation, unless we find ways to ensure that our monthly dollar needs are met, I don't think Sri Lanka has any way out. And if we don't come out of this trap within the next 10 years, Sri Lanka will remain among the most inflated. Sri Lanka's rupee will remain one of the most inflated currencies in the world. Sri Lanka will suffer one of the worst food shortages in the world. Sri Lanka will suffer the most in every way possible. So much so that every day, even today, I had to stay 3 hours in line to get fuel to my car. There's no cooking gas. There's a huge food shortage. There's power cuts everywhere. As Mr. Umesh said, we can't plan anything on a daily basis, and our productivity is less. And until June 2021, this government did not take heed about vaccines for COVID-19 also. They were just saying, no, we don't need vaccines. We have Dhammikapaniya, some syrup manufactured by someone who is a complete charlatan. So this is the country's situation, and in the next 10 years, unless the Rajapaksas go home, unless the youth's voice is heeded to, unless there's a proper restructuring rather than this plastering and just covering up the situation, nothing will change. It will be as if operation success but patient dead.
Okay. A Wijewardena, I saw you agreed with a lot of what Shihar was saying there. So, I mean, when you look at Sri Lanka in the context of the global economy and the history of the global economy as well, you know, this isn't the first country we've seen default. We see a number of Latin American countries, Argentina, for example, on this constant boom and bust cycle. What do you see as the prospects for Sri Lanka, given that context?
Well, Andrea, what would happen is that actually we have defaulted for the first time in our post-independence history. So this is actually something which we shouldn't have done. But the circumstances have compelled us to defaulting. I have to make two corrections here. Correction number one is that the usable foreign exchange reserves are not 700 billion, as Shihar has said. It's about 124 million today. Second one is this 51 billion debt account is an underestimate by the central bank because it has done some smart accounting. What it has actually done is the ISBs, the international sovereign bonds, amounted to 13 billion at the face value, have been recorded by the central bank at the market price of, say, 6 billion US. So as a result, we have underestimated the total debt amount. The amount which the government has to pay within the next 12-month period is about $8 billion US. And when we add the money which the government entities like the Ceylon Electricity Board, Sri Lankan Airlines, Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, and various other government bodies which have borrowed on a guarantee from the government, they are also to be defaulted. Now, all the rating agencies, when the announcement was made that Sri Lanka would not pay and it would suspend the payment of the amount, we were downgraded from CC to C. But today, when we have actually defaulted the interest payment which is due, we will be categorized in the category of D, default one. Along with that, all the banks in Sri Lanka will be categorized as D. All the other public sector entities which have been borrowing abroad will be categorized as D. So it is a situation where we will not be able to come out, Andrea, without the support of the International Monetary Fund. Now, that is where the final decision rests. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to have to interrupt you there. Very unfortunately, we are out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us. I'm sure we'll be speaking again in the near future about this topic, unfortunately. But thank you for sharing your views and insights, and our viewers as well for watching. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.